Alrighty. Everyone's favorite neo-traditional, honky-tonkin', boot-stompin', heart-throbbin' trio Midland is back with a brand new album, The Sonic Ranch, and it's time to talk about it. If you didn't already know, this isn't necessarily Midland's third studio album, depending on how you want to look at it. It's most definitely not the follow-up to Let It Roll. I did a video discussing my initial thoughts regarding the news and information we had at the time, which granted was limited, so be sure to check that out. However, for basic context, essentially Midland did a documentary with CMT, and it was an insight into the band's beginnings and first stages as a group. Cameron Duddy, the bass player and backup vocalist, was a music video producer before joining Midland, best known for his work on several Bruno Mars videos, as well as Jennifer Lopez, One Republic, Fifth Harmony, and among many more also lies Midland, as he directs most of their videos as well. Regardless, he thought it'd be fun to document their journey while they recorded music in the Sonic Ranch studio down in Texas, and the documentary is just bits and pieces of that footage compiled for our enjoyment. How does any of that relate to this here record? Well, it's because the Sonic Ranch album is the album Midland recorded down at the Sonic Ranch in 2014, and they finally released it as an accompanying soundtrack to the documentary, which all came out on March 19th, 2021. Hopefully now you understand why I hesitate to call it their third studio album. If anything, it was their first, but I'm getting off topic. After I had gotten a better understanding of the situation, I didn't go into this album concerned as much as I just had low expectations. I was expecting some shoddy production with underwhelming quality and effort because I was under the impression these were sort of throwaways from On the Rocks and never ended up being revisited, unlike the opener 14 Gears, which obviously made the final cut of their Let It Roll album in 2019. But I'm happy to say I was wrong. This was a very pleasant surprise because this was no collection of album scraps. The Sonic Ranch is its own body of work. Despite being low budget, this is without a doubt a finished album that just never got released, which I would imagine was partly due to not having a label to push them at the time. These aren't individual songs chucked under the same album. This is an album that cohesively works a lot better than I thought it would. Throughout the album, there are a few common themes, mostly living in a small, tumbleweed town, but moreover, the journey to make it as a musician. It's the traveling musician trying to get his roots in the ground and the struggles of chasing after that lifestyle. Whether it be scraping by for change or the romantic struggles of always being on the road, the Sonic Ranch is very much a traveling musician's soundtrack. Moreover, the two songs from their time in 2014 that ended up making their two studio albums were Check Cash and Country, which is about busting your butt to make ends meet in the music scene, and 14 Gears, which is just about the trials you face in a long-distance relationship due to one partner always being on the road. Now with the Sonic Ranch available to us, I think Check Cash and Country just fits better thematically on the Sonic Ranch, seeing as the whole album was written while they were living that lifestyle, but I'm not heartbroken that it isn't on here, it just could have fit nicely. Also, while we're here on the songwriting themes found on the album, I want to point out just how great of a songwriter Jess Parker Carson is. I didn't learn this until watching the documentary and reading the credits, but 9 of the 11 different songs on the Sonic Ranch were solo writes by Jess. Solo writes are incredibly rare nowadays. Grady touched on this in his Alan Jackson video, but every song nowadays seems to have 3 or more writers on it. And while that's fine, multiple perspectives and vocabularies can often really sharpen a song up, there's something about solo writes that I find just resonates with the listener more. It doesn't feel as manufactured, and on the flip side of my previous statement, when you only have one perspective and vocabulary, you're getting a more raw and honestly written song because it's coming straight from the writer with no external interference or influence. With that out of the way, we're going to move on to the side that Midland is best known for, the sound of this record. The word that comes to mind is authentic. Unlike Let It Roll, where at times the songwriting just felt impersonal, the Sonic Ranch is as authentic as you're going to get. They wear the influences of their surroundings on their sleeves. Over the years, Midland has transitioned into this glossy 70s diner bad boys, but in the beginning they were a Southern Texas trio, and there's nothing wrong with either of those chapters. I just love how they really leaned into that Tex-Mex style like on Champagne's for the Pain, because why wouldn't they? They had nothing to prove or lose, so they just made the music that sounded right to them. To expand the thought of wearing their surroundings on their sleeves, what I mean is that their music reflects and sounds influenced by where they were, the border of Texas and Mexico. This record is arguably more throwback country than their other work, but not in the way someone like Riley Green is throwback country. This album is much more sombreros and patterned jackets than pickup trucks and blue jeans. More Spanish towels and cacti than wraparound porches and dirt roads. It just radiates Central American cowboy energy, and I love it. Like I said, this album sounds like something you'd hear on the Sunday morning classics. The instrumental palette is very traditional and simple, acoustic guitars with dreamy steel and punchy sharp electrics. The use of a 12-string was also really smart because it adds this extra layer of gloss while still feeling organic and untouched. They also use claps very tastefully, like on Cowgirl Blues. Do I think clap tracks were terribly overused in 2017, 2018? Yes, but I think one of the big problems with it wasn't the clap itself, but the fact they were so artificially manufactured and looped. To use Midland as an example, it's partially why I think Mr. Lonely went under the radar as a clap-driven track, because there's a difference between this and this. The real claps just contribute to a more hoedown, inclusive, fun energy, as opposed to the synthetic clap loops which feel lazy and monotonous. Despite this record being very emotionally mixed towards the lifestyle of a musician, the trio never fails to make the most of it, like on Cowgirl Blues, which is about a rodeo star always being away from his lover. Yet the song brings this energy that doesn't go against the story of the song, but rather feels like it's making the most of what the character can while gone. All over this album, the energy is undeniable. Whether it's happy honky tonk or down on your luck energy, every song does a great job of bringing out the respective emotion. When this record is positive, they really lean into that twang and boot stomping energy, and when we're in a sadder moment, they let the harmonies carry you through. And when they're on the road, the instrumental reflects that. It's all just very thoughtfully constructed. One thing I do want to emphasize is the percussion on this album, or lack of. These songs are rhythmically driven, not percussively driven. They find ways to use their instruments' rhythms or gaps and rests in the rhythm to create the illusion of percussion. This just helps keep the whole vibe very underground and handmade, and then when they do use drums, it's either brushed, incredibly light, or a combination of both. Lastly, before we get into the shortcomings of this project, I want to share some specific moments or highlights that I just really enjoyed and want to mention. All over this record, there's loads of catchy sing-along hooks, examples being Cowgirl Blues, Fool's Luck, Will This Life Be As Grand, which I will talk about in a moment, Champagne's for the Pain, and specifically Runnin' Wild. That just brings my soul to heaven. Runnin' Wild in general is one of the standouts in my opinion, from the quick-moving pace it has to easily my favorite melody in the chorus, and just the overall motion this song possesses. It's about, as the title would suggest, running wild, being a freewheeler, and as I was saying earlier, the instrumental just knocks that idea out of the park alongside the story itself. And finally, I really like the closer, This Town. I thought it was a fitting closer, sort of ties all the themes from the album together, and then it's just on its way back onto the road, see you later. Now to the faults, because this album is by no means perfect. Though this aspect I'm about to talk about can be viewed as cool and part of this time capsule concept, the vocal performances can often feel underwhelming, as if they just needed one more take. On the whole, the performances from both the lead vocalist Mark Weistrack and Jess Parker Carson, who is a backup but takes the lead on a few occasions here, they often just feel timid, which is understandable. They weren't new to music overall, but recording music can be daunting even when you're alone, let alone in a professional studio with people hearing your every note. The trickle effect of this timidity is different for both Mark and Jess. With Mark, his pronunciation becomes slurred or just awkward. When he holds back from really going for it, he often blows over the lines, sacrificing the impact they could have. He's almost too hung up on the melodies and loses focus on his pronunciation. Over the years, Mark has always had a free-flow style to his delivery, but not to this extent. I mean, come on, despite Cowgirl Blues being a jam, if you heard it on the radio, you wouldn't have a clue what he was saying unless you either read the lyrics or until you heard Jess Carson's vocals, which has its own problems. It's like growing up hearing Darius Rucker singing Only Wanna Be With You, and then you hear Post Malone's cover, and only then do you actually realize what the lyrics are actually saying. Like I said, Mark isn't on the lead for every song. Jess Carson takes lead on a few different tracks, and as I was saying earlier, the trickle effect for Jess's timidity is basically the exact opposite of Mark. He overpronounces things. He's almost too focused on the lyrics, and in turn his melodies can often feel flat or uninspired, especially on his rendition of Cowgirl Blues. It often feels like he's narrating the song as opposed to singing it. The other song in which Jess takes the lead is Will This Life Be As Grand, which I think had the potential to be the runaway hit personally. Will This Life Be As Grand is a simple song where Jess is saying he's not hating life without this girl, he's not nervous she'll never come back, he's just thinking of the future and wondering will this life be as grand as it once was when he was with this girl. I think sonically it's the breeziest and arguably the most enjoyable, at least if you're looking to kick back and relax. The echoing guitars, dreamy steel as I was talking about earlier, and the harmonies in the chorus. It's chilling yet satisfying at the same time. It's just the vocal performance is really underwhelming. I like the tone of Jess Carson's voice, he just didn't have the strength he does now. Roll Away was one of my favorites from the Let It Roll album, and if Jess had the confidence he did on Roll Away and applied it to Will This Life Be As Grand, I think we could have been looking at a real gem. Not that it isn't, it's just being held back from reaching its full potential. So on one side, you could look at that point and say, well, it's cool to see the progression and improvements over the years, but critically speaking, it does faintly tarnish this record in many spots. One other moment I didn't quite understand was Jess Carson's Cowgirl Blues. The instrumental is so watered down and muffled, it just sounds like one big bleh of sound. His voice also has some effects on it I don't think I really like. In all honesty, it sounds quite quirky and cool. It just doesn't really fit with the rest of the album being so raw and organic. It's just too spacey and weird, but I can see myself listening to it a good amount. It blends well with some Blonde or even Zayn's new album, which I really freaking like. Last little thing, a lot of these songs are very loose, which is a double-edged sword. All throughout, the contrasting harmonies and sloppy, in air quotations, guitars do provide a fun, jovial feel, but there are also times, like on Fool's Luck, where they simply fell out of rhythm for a few moments. Just another take or two could easily fix that, but oh well. With all of that said, on the whole, I'm really liking this one. It was a very pleasant surprise that I ended up enjoying a lot more than I thought I would. It surpassed my expectations and then some. It was hard to think critically about this album while listening because it just sweeps you away into tumbleweed Narnia. This album is super easy to get lost in, which is a great thing. It's what an album should be able to do. But it made thinking while listening a difficult task. I often found myself just grooving along with the beat, and then before I knew it, I went through 4 songs. As a soundtrack and telescope into the past, I think it's a really fun listen. I would easily recommend this thing to country music fans and just music fans in general. As an album, it's not that there's any blatantly awful moments, but the overall quality is just a few rungs lower than their label-funded albums, which is expected, and though it is cool to hear these unpolished songs, from a critical standpoint, they're simply not as good as songs from On the Rocks or Let It Roll. But before I make this sound like some iPhone quality album, the production is still at a standard that is very appealing and enjoyable in an everyday environment. It's just not to the incredibly high standard of their other music. It's rough around the edges, which is a gift and a curse in this scenario. It really all depends on how you want to look at it or what you're looking for in your music. As for my favorite track on the record, it's a toss-up between a few. Runnin' Wild, Cowgirl Blues, and Will This Life Be As Grand are probably my top 3 at the moment, but knowing me, that'll change in time. As for a rating, critically speaking, I'm going to give this one a 7 on the dot. I say critically speaking because I really enjoyed this record. I'm a big fan of what Midland has done and continues to do, and this is just another great body of work from the trio, especially given what it is. For now, I will eagerly wait until their next big announcement, and until next time, have a great day.